This is the American Ideals Research Paper Conference. So the topic is, has the United States achieved the American ideals in the years from 1941 to today? Choose 3 different eras and discuss all 5 ideals for each era. So the first thing that you want to do is actually think about the eras that you're interested in. If you go down to the bottom of the research guide posted on the class webpage, you can see I have a whole bunch of different options available to you. You are going to choose 3 of those. It's whatever 3 interest you the most. Generally speaking, most students choose World War II, 1950s, 1960s, or the modern era, the early 2000s. It's not that you can't do the 70s, 80s, or 90s, but I find that sometimes students who start those decades actually end up getting a little bored and they end up switching to something else. In addition, we have, of course, already studied World War II, so that makes it a little bit easier. And then we'll be studying the 50s and 60s in the next couple of units. And so students are familiar, and then it makes it a little bit easier, perhaps. Okay, so once you've chosen which decades that you would like to cover, or eras, I recommend that you actually start your research by defining the 5 ideals. What you're going to be doing in this particular topic is very similar to what we did in our very first paragraph. In fact, I would recommend that you use that first paragraph as kind of a guide. So you're going to be looking at, let's say, World War II era, and you're going to be evaluating whether World War II era met the ideals or not. So you're going to be looking for different examples that either show that liberty was being upheld or rights were being upheld, or of course the opposite. For example, if you were doing the World War II era and you were arguing the ideals were not being met, then you could be talking about internment as one of your 3 examples. And internment, of course, is violating the ideal of liberty. You could also argue that it's violating the ideal of opportunity. Okay, so in terms of defining the ideals and the term ideal itself, okay, what you want to make sure that you are using is a source that I have provided you with. You'll notice up here it says recommended sources. So you can use your textbook and you can use lectures posted on the class webpage. However, notice the asterisk. These do not count as one of the 5 sources, but they are good for background for your introduction and to help you in part A of your analysis. Now, the reading that I recommend you start with that actually can count as a source and you can actually pull direct quotes from is a reading posted on the class webpage. It's called Defining and Debating American Ideals. This particular reading, of course, is the reading that we used in our very first unit. So the way that you're going to find it is like this. You're going to go to the class webpage. There we go. And you're going to go to the main screen. And you're going to scroll down all the way to U.S. History Readings. You're going to click on U.S. History Readings. And it's going to be this number 1 right here, Defining and Debating America's Founding Ideals. This has the definitions that you need to use in this particular paper. It also defines the word ideal. Basically, your first 6 note cards are going to be definitions made from this particular reading. Now, you need the source or citation information for this reading. So where you're going to find that information is you're going to, again, go to the main page. Then you're going to scroll down again all the way to the bottom to this U.S. History Research Paper. You will click on U.S. History Research Paper. What you will then do is scroll down to Works Cited or MLA. You can see right here it says Source Information for Select Online Class Readings. You're going to go ahead and click on that, and you're going to then open up a Word document. On that Word document, it'll have the source information for that reading for you to create your note cards as well as what you're going to put in your source list. So here it is, Unit 1, Number 1, Defining and Debating America's Founding Ideals. And you'll notice the author is Goff. So on your note cards, you will write Goff, and then there are page numbers on this reading. So make sure that you're doing that. Now, on your source list, which will eventually turn into a Works Cited page, you're going to scroll down to the bottom of the page, and you will see there is Goff again, and here is the source information, and it is already in MLA format. So all you have to do is copy and paste that into your own document that has all of your sources listed in it. Okay, so you're going to start with those definitions. So once you have all those words defined, including ideal, then you're going to start to do research for your body paragraphs. Hopefully you've already decided on 3 eras, okay, to research. So then what you're going to do is start reading about these eras. We have tons of books in the library that cover each of these eras. They're what we call decade books, and there's whole sections in the library covering them. I will take you on a little tour of the library at some point so you can see where those decades books are located. And you're simply going to start reading and looking for examples of the 5 ideals, either being met or, of course, not met. You're going to write all this information, of course, on your note cards, keeping track of the sources as you go. Once you have started to accumulate note cards, and I would say you probably needed to accumulate about 20 note cards or so, what you want to do is you want to look at your note cards and basically create 2 piles. The piles showing that the ideals are being upheld and the piles showing that they're not. Whichever pile's bigger, that'll determine this number 2, how you're going to argue. I always recommend that you go where the evidence takes you. I wouldn't try to come into this with your mind made up about how you want to argue. I would simply argue where your note cards lead you. Now, once you've made a decision of how you're going to argue, then you're going to start to look for a little bit more specific information. So as you're researching the decade, you do need to look for all 5 ideals. These need to be 3 unique events, laws, courts, decision that relate to the ideals, and all ideals need to be referenced in each body paragraph. So I'm going to give you an example for World War II that will kind of help you understand what I am meaning. Okay, so let's say that you're going to argue that World War II was not an era, okay, of the ideals. Okay, so you could use one example, perhaps, of internment. Then maybe another example that you're going to use is the system of rationing. And then finally, maybe you're going to use the idea of segregation in the military. So you have quotes on these 3 things. Now what you need to do is within these 3 quotes, you need to cover all 5 ideals. Okay, so that means that you're going to have to include multiple ideals for some of them. For example, for internment, you could perhaps talk about both rights and democracy. For rationing, perhaps you could talk about both opportunity and liberty. And then for segregation in the military, maybe you're talking about equality. And again, it's how these ideals are not being met. Now, you don't have to use these. You could argue that World War II did uphold the ideals, and you would simply need to find 3, of course, different pieces of evidence. And then you need to match them to the appropriate ideal. You just need to make sure that you are covering all 5 ideals within 3 quotes. These body paragraphs are exactly what we've been writing all year long. Instead of writing 1, though, you are now writing 3 of these body paragraphs. Okay. So I'm going to go back up for a moment and talk a little bit more about one of these online readings. Okay, so if you choose to cover the most recent era on here, this option D, the 2000s, 2000 to 2010, I highly recommend that you use a reading posted on the class webpage called American Ideals Today. It actually comes from the same exact book as Defining and Debating the Ideals, so the author is Goff. But it is covering the most recent years and whether the ideals have been met in these most recent years or not. So again, it's on the class webpage, and it's under U.S. History Readings. And if I scroll down to the bottom, it is this very last reading right here, American Ideals Today. So you click on that, and what you will see is it's organized by ideals, and it talks about the ways in which the ideals are being met in the post 9/11 world as ways perhaps they are not being met. So I would highly recommend that you go ahead and you do use this reading if you are doing that last decade. If you're not doing that last decade, you can just ignore that. Okay, now besides doing research for your body paragraphs, you also need to do research for your introduction. So as you are completing your research, don't forget about this. So it says explain the origins of the ideals. You can use that online reading that you use to define these ideals to help you. And then you're going to need to research and provide basic background information on the 3 decades you're discussing in your paper. So don't forget that you are going to have research for the introduction as well. I think that about covers it for the American Ideals topic. If you have questions while you're working on the paper, of course, please make sure that you're asking me either in class when we're working on the paper. You can always send me an email, or you can sign up for an access session when we're discussing or working on the paper. Good luck.